Jacob left Beersheba and went towards Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there for the night, because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. Jacob is on the run. He has twice conned his brother out of what was rightfully Esau's. First Esau's blessing, first Esau's birthright, and then the blessing from their father Isaac. Now, what we didn't hear today, what we missed between last week's reading and this one, is the intervening stories of the way in which Jacob and his mother Rebekah contrived to trick the dying Isaac, Esau, Isaac, Jacob. I'm surely going to mess all of these up this morning. Jacob and his mother Rebekah contrived to trick the dying Isaac into conferring his blessing, which is rightfully Esau's, on to Jacob. Isaac knows he is dying, and he calls Esau to go and to hunt and to bring back game and to prepare for him his favorite dish. And Esau goes off. And when Rebekah hears this, she tells Isaac to come to him. And they gather a calf from the flock, and they prepare the dish. And Rebekah tells Isaac to take it in. Rebekah tells Jacob to take the dish into the dying Isaac, who can now no longer see. Jacob says he'll know it's me and not Esau. My hands are soft and Esau's are rough. So she tells him to put on some of Esau's clothes and something like Esau's gloves, so he will smell like Esau. And he does this. And Isaac believes that it's his son Esau. And he says to him, "May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth, and of plenty grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." This is the blessing that God conferred upon Abraham, Isaac's father. God blessed Abraham and said he would have land, prosperity, progeny, and he would be a blessing to others. Now, when Esau finds out that Jacob has tricked his father into blessing Jacob, Esau says, "Is he not rightly Jacob? For he has supplanted me 2 times. He took away my birthright, and look, now he has taken away my blessing." Remember that the name Jacob means heel. And Esau says of his brother Jacob, he says, yes, he is most rightly called heel. Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and look now, he has taken away my blessing. It would be an understatement to say Esau is ticked. Esau is now in a rage, and he vows to kill his brother. And Rebekah learns of this and sends her son Jacob back to her people, to her brother Laban, to stay there until at least Esau cools off. Believing this will be a short time, it turns out to be 20 years, and Jacob never sees his mother again. But upon her advice, he flees his brother's murderous rage. And as Jacob returns to her mother's people, he's now retracing the steps of his grandfather, the very path that Abraham didn't want Isaac to trace. He is returning to where the story of Abraham began. He is returning to the Ur of the Chaldeans. So retracing his grandfather's steps, it's now as if nothing happened, as if Abraham didn't travel to a new land. And while Isaac has some wealth, the land his father Abraham was promised, neither Jacob nor Esau can enjoy this inheritance. In Genesis, it seems the promise is always in peril. The promise is always in peril. So Jacob is now a fugitive. And although, unlike his ancestor Cain, he is not guilty, nevertheless, like him, Jacob is now a fugitive. And he's now in a place in between. He has traveled one day and it is nightfall. He has fled the place of his birth. He has fled his home. And Jacob is wandering. He is fleeing his brother's murderous rage, which he helped to bring on. Yet, like Cain, as Jacob is forced to flee, to wander, God provides security for Jacob. After Cain is forced from his land, his home, he laments his punishment to God. He says, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Today you have driven me away from the soil, and I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and anyone who meets me may kill me." But God promises to Cain sevenfold vengeance on anyone who would kill him. And God puts a mark on Cain. And God provides both of these fugitives, Cain and Jacob, the one a murderer, the other a liar and a cheat. God provides security for both of these. And Jacob is now between places. He's tired, he can't go on. Without safety, he makes his bed beneath the stars. But like his ancestor Cain, God's protection is with him. While he sleeps, he lets down his conscious guard, and God comes to him. The God of promise, the God of the promise, comes to Jacob in a dream. In a dream there was a ladder set up on the earth, the top of it reaching to the heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And the Lord stood beside him and said. Now, as it turns out, we've gotten this image all wrong for a long time as we hear the word ladder. Our translation uses the word ladder, but the Hebrew word would better be translated as ramp. So remember that this is the ancient worldview of the cosmos. And the graphics that I didn't intend to be there at the top block out that above everything is heaven, the dwelling place of God. So this ladder is more like a ramp sometimes in temples that would go up to a door at the top of the temple, the symbol or metaphor being that that ramp went to the door or the gate of heaven. While Jacob dreamed that there was a ramp that reached all the way to the firmament, the separation between God and creation, and the angels of God ascended and descended on it. Apparently, not only the angels of God ascended and descended this ramp, but even God did too. Because after Jacob saw the ramp in his dream, God is standing right beside him. And the Lord stood beside him. Now you've had that situation, I'm sure, where you're looking for someone to come out of a building, out of a store, out of a mall, or out of a crowd, and while you're looking for them, suddenly they're standing right beside you. And in his dream, Jacob has been awestruck by the angels going up and down the ramp, so much so that he didn't even notice that God had also descended to him and now stands beside him. We have this experience in our lives too. We're struck by something we've never seen before, an experience we've never had before, and it strikes us as holy. Yet we aren't aware that in this experience God is right beside us. Then God says to Jacob, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring, and your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. This is the promise God made to Abraham, land, offspring, and blessing. And the promise was implied to Isaac as Abraham's son, and now God makes it explicit to Jacob. To Jacob, God extends the promise of Abraham to Jacob, who is a liar and a cheat. Now this is in fact the story of the whole Bible, because the people that we would expect to be holy and to receive the blessing are not necessarily the ones to whom God appears and gives a blessing, whom God rescues, whom God brings into the kingdom. In fact, the Hebrew people themselves are kind of like this. They're not always the kind of people that are examples. God's promise extends to the most unexpected people, even to people like you and me. God is most gracious by extending this promise to Jacob. With our God, things are never quite as they seem or as we think they should be. God's promises often extend to the outcasts. As I wrote this, I had a qualifier here that most people here this morning can remember the commercials for Marlboro cigarettes. And as I look out, I'm sure that almost all of you, only those who never watched TV would not remember the commercials for Marlboro cigarettes, which included the kind of man that we Americans are enamored of. We called him since then the Marlboro Man. He was a lone cowboy. He was a man who gave off an air of strength and independence that he didn't need anyone. He has become the archetype of American rugged individualism. But you see, the thing is that the Bible wasn't written by rugged individualists. The Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, was written by and for community. It was written to be heard in worship with other people. And let's remember that the book we call Genesis was more than likely recorded by priests while they were in exile in Babylon, while they were held captive, without their roots, without their rituals. While they were held captive, the Jewish people remembered and held on to the promises of God. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring, and your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. Now, like the Hebrew people, sometimes, even in our own lives, we are held captive to forces stronger than ourselves. And in that captivity, we try to remember the promises of God, the promises of life, which were underscored by Jesus of Nazareth, who promised us abundant life. Land, offspring, and blessing. These were God's promises to a community, to the descendants of Abraham. In Deuteronomy, which is part of the Exodus story, the journey of the Hebrew people to the Promised Land, the journey of the Hebrew people from slavery to bondage, God tells them to say this as they entered the Promised Land. A wandering Aramean was my ancestor. He went down into Egypt and lived there as an alien. Few in number, and there he became a great nation, mighty and populous. Jacob was this wandering Aramean. Now, in biblical times, survival was never certain. Although it's true even today, we don't often think about this because we plug into the structures and institutions of our society and our culture and our economic system, and our survival never seems to be quite so precarious. But in biblical times, Life outside of community left survival always in doubt. To be part of community gave a person and that community a better chance of survival. To be outside of community left a person's survival always in doubt. And more often than not, Jesus' healing stories include welcoming the person back into community, giving them renewed life. And because a person's survival was dependent on his or her connection to a community, people derived their identity from that community. Land and offspring made the survival of a community more likely. Now, before I began a serious study of the Bible, I thought the promises of land and offspring were trite. And of course, in these United States at this time, we prefer to have fewer offspring. It's a smaller financial burden on us as we are raising children. So, land and offspring. Well, offspring, jeez. All I want is 2. I don't want to have any more children than the number of parents. Then they can't outnumber us. That was my thought. And when my ex-wife and I raised my niece, there were 2 to 1. It was a nice ratio. The promises of land and offspring seem trite to me. But these are both real promises and these are metaphors. These are metaphors for life. These are metaphors for survival. So God then says to Jacob, "Know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go." Now we make this same promise to ourselves each Sunday as we sing our closing hymn, when we say, "God will go with you each hour of every day. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. I will bring you back to this land." Then Jacob woke up and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't know it." Well, hasn't this happened to us in a situation or a place? That something happens and we realize that God is in our presence. And he was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." Think about the ramp to the gate of heaven. Even Jacob, a liar and a cheat, can recognize holy ground. But you know that the events in our lives will tell us this, that so often it's the people that we didn't expect us to reveal God to us. It's the situations in which we didn't expect God to be revealed to us that become the places where we encounter the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. He called that place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at first. Later, God appears to Moses in a burning bush, and God says, "I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And that is why we read these stories, because they are fundamental to the biblical story. These are the stories of the patriarchs. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, and the God of Moses. This is the God of misfits, the God of the marginalized and the unimportant, the God of cheats, and the God of murderers, the God who can surely be God to you